right, welcome to week 2 of our series called Goals, and we're talking about setting and achieving goals. Now, I'm not talking about just any type of everyday run-of-the-mill type of goals, because we make goals all the time. We make goals like finish my homework by 7 p.m., or make the volleyball team this year, or get my crush to notice me. And we set these goals every single day, but I'm not talking about those simple, everyday type of goals. I'm talking about God-sized goals. Now, when you set your goals, whether it be God-sized or your everyday type goals, my question for you is, have you ever felt stuck in those goals? Have you ever felt stuck in achieving your goals? Now, if you have ever felt stuck in achieving your goals, maybe, just maybe, it's because your goal didn't have a plan. If you are going to set and achieve goals, you have to have a plan in place in order to accomplish your goal. Now, we have multiple different types of goals, and a lot of them, maybe they take very little planning. But to accomplish a God-sized goal, we need a plan. And some of the goals that might take a plan for you is a spiritual goal. Maybe spending time with God more regularly takes a plan. Or maybe it's a mental goal of learning something new this week or this year. What about a physical goal of trying to get stronger, trying to get faster, or just trying to bench that certain amount, whatever it is, that 40 pounds for some of you out there. Or maybe it is a relational goal. Maybe it's being a better friend to somebody, being kinder to your family. And so with our goals, we need to have plans in place. Now, these goals are great, and the thing is that without a plan, they're just wishful thinking. So what about you? What is your one most plan-worthy goal for this year? Do you have a plan-worthy goal? Have you put into place a plan to meet your goal and to accomplish it? So we're looking at the story of Nehemiah while we're in the series. Now, about 140 years before this book was written, the city of Jerusalem had been completely destroyed and conquered by an enemy army. And it left the city in ruins. But God promised that one day the Jewish people would return to the city. And we find Nehemiah becoming passionate about this, becoming passionate about helping to rebuild the city that his ancestors, his family was from. Now, his lifetime, he had never known this city as what it used to be. He's always known it as a city in ruins. And Nehemiah was passionate about seeing Jerusalem restored, and he saw this problem. He saw this practical problem that without walls, God's people would be vulnerable to yet another attack in this city. Then a spiritual problem is that leaving the walls in shambles would dishonor God, but rebuilding them would be a sign that their people were returning to God and choosing to be obedient again. And so Nehemiah was inspired, and he had this passion for the people and for his God. And he set this God-sized goal, but in order to achieve this God-sized goal, he had to put in a plan. He had to have a plan in place. And so he had a goal, now he had to put in a plan. So if you remember from the message last week, the very first thing that Nehemiah did is that he spent time in prayer. He fasted and he prayed for months. Let's recap a couple of the verses that we read last week. So Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4, it says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." And skip ahead to verse 11 at the very end of his prayer. He says, "O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And so here's something that we learn and that we can notice from Nehemiah chapter 1. Number one, Nehemiah did not ask God for step-by-step instructions. He knew that God wanted him to lead the change and to rebuild the walls, and that was enough. He did not need to say, okay, I'll just sit here and wait for you to finish telling me the rest of this plan. And by the time that he reached the end of his prayer in verse 11 there, Nehemiah was already working on his plan. He asked God to help him to be successful in what he was about to attempt. Because he was a cupbearer to the king, and so he had to go to the king and ask permission to go back to rebuild Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah was making note of the resources that God had already given him. And as the cupbearer to the king, he had access and influence with the most powerful person in the kingdom. And so to sum that up, Nehemiah made a plan while he prayed. I believe that God was kind of helping to direct his words and direct his plans, but it was coming from Nehemiah. He was developing a plan to achieve this God-sized goal. So we are picking up in Nehemiah chapter 2. And Nehemiah, he is, like I said, he is the cupbearer to the king. So he is at the feet of the king all the time. And he has never, ever been sad in the presence of the king. And in this moment, Nehemiah has a look of sadness. And the king asks, "Why does your face look so sad if you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." And Nehemiah was very much afraid, but he said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire?" So the king asked him, "What is it that you want?" And in that moment, Nehemiah prayed to the God of heaven. He answers the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me, Nehemiah, to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so I can rebuild it." Now in these verses, we discover that Nehemiah had not just been praying, he had also been preparing in great detail. And so when the king asked Nehemiah why he looked sad, he had an answer prepared. The king asked Nehemiah what he wanted, and Nehemiah had a request prepared. The king wanted to know how long, as we read further on, the king wanted to know how long Nehemiah's journey would take. He had a timeline prepared. And since the king seemed pretty open to his idea, Nehemiah also had a list of requests prepared to see if the king would help him in rebuilding his hometown. From the asking permission to have safe travel to where he was going, from asking for supplies to rebuild, he had a plan. So Nehemiah already had a plan in place, and now it was time to recruit others to help him make it happen. But first, he needed to figure out how to deal with the people who definitely did not want to help and definitely did not want him to succeed. And so in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10 through 20, we can read this, and we read about the people that are against him. Nehemiah was not naive, and he expected people to oppose him. And there were definitely a few that opposed him. He knew to hold his tongue and to keep his plan a secret from the people who opposed him, though. He was also so wise about who he trusted. And so he kind of kept quiet. He traveled by night with just a few men. And he kept quiet. And he was wise about who he trusted. He also figured out a way to bypass the people who opposed him so that he could recruit the people who shared in his vision for this God-sized goal, and he surrounded himself with the right people. To sum it up, Nehemiah planned for the opposition, and he knew how to overcome the opposition. Now, the thing about Nehemiah is that he was made for this. God had given him a huge task to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, but God also gave Nehemiah something else. He gave Nehemiah everything that he needed to make this happen. Nehemiah had access to the God of all creation through prayer. He had his God-given talents, abilities, and presence. He had the resources, opportunities, and connections that God had given him. And he had other people that God put into his life and into his path. Now, although Nehemiah's God-sized goal probably scared him and it completely overwhelmed him at times, Nehemiah did not give up, and he did not wait around for somebody else to handle it. Nehemiah made a plan and he executed his plan. Now, although Nehemiah's goal was extraordinary, he understood the tools he would need to accomplish that goal were just ordinary and already available to him. Nehemiah took the vision that God had given him and the skills that God had given him and the resources that God had given him, and he got to work. And Nehemiah trusted that accomplishing this God-sized goal was exactly what he was made to do. And just like Nehemiah, you are designed for God-sized goals too. Now, just like Nehemiah, you and I, we have everyday us-sized goals. But we also have God-sized, once-in-a-lifetime type goals that God has given us the passions for. Now, maybe you're still trying to figure out what it is that is going to be your God-sized goal and what it is that you are so passionate about that God has given you those passions. The truth is that we all have the building blocks to accomplish the God-sized goals that he has given us. We have ourselves. We have our own abilities and our own relationships and our own personality. We have those around us. We have friends, we have parents, we have leaders and mentors. We have others around us to help us accomplish these God-sized goals. We have the resources. Maybe it's through money or supplies or an audience. Maybe your position in leadership. Maybe an opportunity that God has given you. You have the things that he has as a building block to achieve and to accomplish the God-sized goal that's in your life. And last but certainly not least, it actually should have been first on the list. We have the God of all creation. We have a God that created you and loves you and gave you these passions. And he is the most important resource that we have in accomplishing our God-sized goals, our GOAT goals. And I want you to remember, just like Nehemiah, you have been designed to accomplish God-sized goals.